Yeah, I'm doing good. How are you?
Awesome.
Yeah, it's good to see you. How have you been filling up your time during this quarantine? I've seen that I've just been watching your Instagram posts and they're very interesting. You've been doing that and you've been also doing some live feeds and stuff too.
Because there's so much stuff coming in and there's so much stuff being done, I don't want to just kind of uh, do the same old thing and kind of just get lost in the mix. And it's not even just so much about getting lost in the mix. It's just about doing something uh, slightly different, both for myself and for the viewer. Just because there's so much. It's just like here I am in my living room, my studio, whatever, doing my thing. Whether it's with good sound or bad sound, good video or bad video. It's just
Yeah.
I'm trying to still think of ways to approach it a little differently and bring something unique.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I thought I saw something that maybe John Ghazi was putting together.
For that, me and my girlfriend Ashley, who also is in Gogol Bordello, we've been going down to the islands prior to their big hurricane.
Right.
And we kind of like vacation there, and then we also hang out and do some like shows. She sings a couple of songs, I sing a couple of songs, so that we're gonna do that
Cool.
kind of thing on Friday.
Okay, gotcha.
As far as doing like things that are specifically my own thing, I kind of been still brainstorming as to how to do it in a unique way.
As far as all that goes, it is overwhelming. There's so much going on. And where do you live?
New York City.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So,
It's all complicated.
yeah.
It's so my mom's a nurse, so I'm kind of
Oh,
getting
okay.
so
Wow.
obviously where we are, where me and my girlfriend are, we are, you know, we're in our 30s and we're kind of sitting at home and everything's safe and our supermarkets are plenty stocked and overall our neighborhood is not that kind of
Okay.
intensely hit.
Mhm.
Whereas where my mom works, her hospital is right next to where Elmhurst is, and that's the one of the hardest hit hospitals in I think the country.
Yeah, I've heard that name for sure.
Yeah, so she's like the relief hospital for that. So I'm getting
Wow.
so while things are really quiet here and everything's cool and everybody's healthy, and I have maybe like 5 friends that have been infected in this neighborhood, and they're fine.
Damn.
They're all younger and they passed it, and it's all good.
Wow.
The things I hear from her are obviously very different.
Yeah. The epicenter of the epicenter.
Yeah, it
That's
is. It really is.
fucking crazy, man. Hopefully we'll get past it
Right.
and then it will be more like a historical document and not something that we have to focus on every single day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um,
Well, there is. Uh, this is not in my opinion. Just that this is. I think this is a pretty popular opinion. While there is a tendency to talk about it, obviously, because this is something that's around and happening every moment of your life. You wake up and you're like, oh, here we are again, right? Like that
mhm.
wasn't a dream.
Right.
This is actually happening. Like life has completely shifted. Well, there is the kind of the pull to talk about it. There's really not a lot to talk about because not
Right.
a lot has happened in terms of data. We still don't have any data, so we still don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can speculate, and yeah, it's good to kind of vent, but there's very little to talk about until there's some science, right? So
Right. Exactly. Until then, we can talk about music. Was there a light bulb moment for you when you were younger, when you decided, like, hey, I want to be a musician?
oh wow, I grew up in the Soviet Union till the age of 10. So rock music was kind of like taboo. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. There was very little kind of Western infiltration. You were not really allowed to listen to Western music when I was growing up. And the little bits of it that my brother and I got through like dub tapes or weird videos that were like, sold on the black market, it it wasn't very fair for me to say I want to do this because it seemed like this is a different planet. Like
Right.
there's no way that I could ever be like on the level with these like gods. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let alone to become one of them, but just to even live in a place where that's even available or legal, right?
Yeah, it might as well have been Mars, right?
Yeah,
At that
that's
point.
what it was. And then, and then we moved, but my family is comes from classical violinists. Like there's a lot of classical violinists in my family, so the music was kind of spiraling around. So I was being educated from a very young age. I was taking like violin lessons from like 5, and then at some point I did convince my parents to switch me to classical guitar. So I played classical guitar since I was like 7, in
Damn.
hopes that one day I can get an electric guitar, but it was all kind of like a fantasy. It wasn't real.
Yeah.
And then when we moved here to the States, it all started kind of becoming more real, and I was able to get an electric guitar, and I started playing rock and blah 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 blah, and then it all kind of spiraled out. So it was like a kind of gradual thing, which at first started with like a complete dream, like, outer space fantasy,
Yeah.
becoming more and more real. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you didn't, from what I understand, you didn't want to do violin at all. Right?
No, no. It's not the instrument. It's just the whole like orchestra classical scene in Soviet Union at that point was so intense because there were so many good players coming out of Soviet Union, and some of them were moving to the States to join these, like, all these massive orchestras in the West, that the programs were really brutal. They were like boot camps, and if you were young and you had one of these instructors that would like hit you in the hand and like abuse you for you to become one of these like trained trolls,
Yeah.
connected to that instrument at all.
That's obviously not your cup of tea.
I don't think it's any kid's cup of tea unless he's forced. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just told my parents, I can't take it. It's too much pressure. It's like I don't want to do it. It's too toxic. And yeah, and I had them transfer me to like a guitar program, and where that was much less intense, because there was no like Russian classical guitar prophecy. So it was much more relaxed. It was like there weren't like hundreds of amazing classical guitar players coming out of Russia at that time. So they were just like, whatever, like kid wants to learn guitar. Like,
Cool.
it was like slow paced. It was like normal, like
Nice.
nobody was
They weren't smacking you
like
around.
practice till your fingers bleed.
Yeah. Well, some people do that on their own, I guess, with guitar.
Later in life, like much later, I went to so fast forward like 10 years, I went to Berkeley at 17, and I did that whole like, but that was a whole different, I decided to, because there was so much competition and blah blah blah. I just decided to like practice until like my hands bled.
Berkeley, man, that's awesome. That's amazing.
That was a really interesting era of my life. I decided to just go somewhere and just dive into something that I don't know anything about. I was just playing rock and roll guitar, and then ended up actually becoming a jazz guitar player for like 3 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was really fun. I learned so much, and then when I got out, I got straight back into touring with rock bands. So it was very strange how that worked.
Well, all of those little deviations on our path add to the overall magical journey, man.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's just different roads getting to the same place. There's a lot of benefits of learning music, kind of studiously or formally, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a lot of benefits, but there's some cons as well. I mean, it very often kind of puts you in this like, it sets boundaries and puts you into this kind of like grid, and I spent a lot of time kind of washing myself of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm very glad. I'm very, very fortunate to know it inside of my psyche. It's good that I've spent the years kind of getting rid of it as well.
Yeah.
Complex.
Yeah, I can imagine so. And that was kind of my idea of how it works with the people that I've known that only read music, and it's hard for them to jam and to escape that box that they're in, like people that were only reared on sheet music. sometimes it's impossible.
There's so many different paths to get there, right?
Yeah.
So I guess everybody's, especially today, everybody has such a different path as to how they figure out how music works in their brain, and then that creative process that they then create is unique in that way, which is super interesting.
Yeah, and it's great. It's so cool to dive into all those different composers and musicians and artists that have taken a totally different approach from one another and can create such beautiful things, you know.
There were some classical dudes that were very punk rock, like Mussorgsky, like dudes that had no formal training. They would learn classical music like the way we learned like our favorite, punk or rock or whatever have you songs from just listening. Like it's pretty incredible the stuff they came up with. I mean, they would just like hear stuff and just make their own system of how they think it works in their brain and write classical music. And then studious composers would look at their scores and be like, this is all fucked, this is all wrong. And you listen to it and it's amazing. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's really interesting that concept of doing music completely self-taught has when music was much more complicated and sophisticated. It still existed and people did it and they did hell of a job. And some stuff out there, it's crazy.
I'm going to give you 3 musical trivia facts. One of them is false.
Okay.
So all you have to do is call bullshit on the one that you think is bullshit.
Okay.
And I don't have a prize for you. Since you're educated in the classical music realm, I went for some classical ones here. So, number 1, I call bullshit. Robert Schumann, the composer, would often plunge his hands into the entrails of a slaughtered animal to heal his ailments.
Okay.
Number 2, a single violin is made from over 70 individual pieces of wood.
Okay.
And number 3, the London Symphony Orchestra was on the Titanic when it made its maiden voyage and went down with the ship. So, out of those 3, which one do you think is bullshit?
C.
You're correct. Yep. That's right. They were supposed to be on it, but at the last minute, they got on a different boat, I guess. So it went down without them. But yeah, you know your shit.
I didn't know this fact one way or another. The London fact. I just figured that. I mean, I've seen some Titanic documentary. I've just never heard of the London Orchestra going down with it. So I figured the other 2 seem really extreme. The violin one seems pretty, I don't know, intact from the little bit that I know about violin making. The first one seems completely insane, but classical composers are insane.
Yeah.
And I think I would have just heard through like all the movies and documentaries that I've seen about the Titanic, about the London Symphony. I never heard that. So
tell us more about Hey Guy.
I was in a band in the early 2000s called Days for a while, and we actually did fairly well. We started doing Warped Tour. It was kind of like a progressive punk pop band. It's very interesting, actually. It's on Spotify if you want.
Days?
Daze. There's a couple of bands with that name. But this is the only like rock one.
Okay.
And then when the band split up, I started writing my own stuff, which at first was just under my name. And after a few years, I got some guys together, and it became more of a band. And then that became Hey Guy. So that has been around since 2000 as that name since 2010. Basically, it was just stuff that I was writing, and the lineup kind of changed over the years because I've always done the thing in my life where I kind of do my original music, but I also am a working musician. I did work other jobs to make money, but eventually I figured out ways to make money through music. So I played on Broadway a lot. I played because I'm in New York.
Wow.
So Broadway shows. Then I toured with some Broadway shows. I was a musical director for like 4 or 5 years for these Nickelodeon kids called the Naked Brothers.
Wow.
So I've always had like jobs that, not that weren't integral. I loved doing it, but they were jobs for making money. And then I had I always had the two roads, you know. I was always pushing my own original stuff, but that I never got that to the point where I was making enough money to sustain.
Yeah.
So I always did other stuff on the side musically, as where I feel like a lot of guys in original bands usually come from, like making money other ways and then touring with their bands. I did the kind of not the most common kind of way of making money through music, and then also having an original band. And then eventually I joined Gogol. But through all that, I've had Hey Guy, like I said, since for many years, and it's changed a lot of ways. And every album, like you can hear, is very different. It's like the course of writing different music, going through different things, and always under that name. These days the band is we're in the midst of a new record, and we did good touring last year.
Cool.
We're figuring it out. It's like it feels like yet another new wave is coming. We've changed our sound a lot, and we're doing some new stuff, and the lineup has kind of been pretty consistent the past 4 years, which is great. I really love the guys that I've been playing with the last 4 years, and we'll see what happens.
That's awesome.
Now with this no touring thing, we might have to, for a while, we might have to carve out some interesting ways to kind of present it. But that's been kind of the thing. It's basically Hey Guy just stands for all music that I was writing, original music that I was writing, and whichever band I was playing with at the time was called. That was under the name Hey Guy, and everything else I was doing was whatever else, right? So
right. How did you meet Gogol?
I fell in love with a go-go singer underneath that motorcycle.